Hi guys, I'm back again. We've got a fun little project for you this week. It is going to be for hump day, something to get you through the rest of the week. This is a fun little phone stand that we're doing with a bumblebee and a daisy, and we're using Decor Americana, just straight Americanas, nothing fancy today. We're using one stencil and we're using a couple of stamps, but aside from that, just a simple project. We should be done pretty quick, and I think you'll enjoy it. I put together a small pattern and a kit, so it'll have the stencil, it'll have the phone stand, and it'll have the written instructions, line drawings, and supply list included. You'll be able to find that on my website at tracymoreau.net. And I also have a giveaway for today. I think you're really going to like this. I've got a live class coming up on August 15th, and I've got a complete kit, surface, gorgeous stamp courtesy of stampendous.com, plus the pattern and any stencils that you might need are going to be in that kit. So hit the subscribe button and get entered for that giveaway. So I think we're ready to start. This is the great little piece we're putting together. These are wonderful little phone stands. They're fantastic. They're easy to paint, and they're a really nice little surface. They're well made. These ones come from stockade.ca. So we're going to work on this little Be Happy phone stand, and it's really simple. It only takes one stencil, and it's this one. We're working with this honeycomb stencil. This is one of my favorites. I like it because it's got 3 different sizes, and we're going to use all 3 sizes, and we're going to use a rather unusual stenciling technique for this. So the color that I've base coated this is called Buttercream. Almost forgot for a second what it was. So the base color is Buttercream, and the color I'm going to stencil with is Marigold. So I pick up a little Marigold on my stencil brush. I'm going to swirl it both directions so it gets a nice even load. Don't forget to go to your paper towel and blot that a little. Now I'm going to stencil in a circular fashion, and I'm going to change directions frequently. Don't need to have a ton of paint to do this. I think I almost took too much off the first time. There we go. So I'm just going to quickly do that with the Marigold. And it should give us quite a sharp contrast. Even though they're both yellows, there's a nice sharp contrast. So I'm going to move my stencil up a little bit, like so. Make sure it's well lined up and tape it back in place. This time, I'm going to pick up that Marigold, but then I'm also going to pick up a little of that base color, which is the banana cream, sorry. And I'm going to make another color that's slightly lighter than the one I just stenciled with. And I'm going to do that next row of honeycomb with that. But then I'm just going to sort of rush across the top of the one below. And what it does is it changes the value. So it's just a little lighter. And then I'm going to pick up a little more of that banana cream. And I'm going to put a skiff of that lighter value across the top of the stencil. Just like that. So now we have a gradient. So it skips from this darker color to a mid value to a lighter value, and it almost matches the background. Almost. So then we're going to come up to this corner and this middle size honeycomb, and I'm going to put it there. And I'm going to pick up a little more of that Marigold on the dirty brush. I'm not changing the brush, not cleaning the brush. And I'm just going to put a little color on that. So it's just a little bit darker than the background. So now we have 2 values in there. So give me 1 second. I'm going to dry out this stencil brush a little. I'm going to come back up here and reposition my stencil. And I'm going to pick up just a tiny bit of warm white. And I'm going to just give the bottom of that a little dusting. And remove. So now I've got a little highlight in there, and that's all I really need. So now I'm just going to clean out this stencil brush a little bit and set it off to the side. Now this needs to dry before we go to the next step. Lucky for me, I have one ready. Now I'm going to quickly put some stamped images in the background of this. Just gives it a little bit of interest. And this is a Stampenda stamp. It's called Vintage Note. It's my favorite stamp. I use it for a lot of different things. And I'm just going to add a little bit here and there. I want some of it to be indistinct and I want some of it to be clear, but nothing perfect. Now, this ink will dry very quickly, so you don't have to wait too long. Oh, I have a little postage, canceled postage stamp. Let's put a couple of those in, just for fun. See there, one here, and a little bit there. I don't want it to be too obvious, but it does break things up a little bit. There, so we have that in there. Look at that, dry already. So the next part we're going to do is to age this edge just a little bit. And we're going to do that with, you guessed it, my favorite color, Asphaltum. I use that color so much, they should have my name on the bottle. So I'm going to just age the edges of this a little bit, which means you're only using a small amount of paint. You don't want it too dark. And you're just going to float a little bit around the outside edge. I'm not being too neat and tidy about it. It's just to age it a little bit. I don't want this to be too bright and sunny, but a little bit of color around the outside edge. When you do this, it actually pulls the eye towards the center of the piece you're working on. So it puts all of the attention on where it's supposed to be, which is on the focal point of your piece. So there we go. Little shadow all around the outside edge. Neatness doesn't count. Perfection is to be avoided at all costs. Now I have a really cool tool that I use quite a bit. The 24 karat gold paint pens. Krylon makes a really good one. This one is from Deco Color. And I like to go around the edge and just put a little gold bead, like so, all the way around. I don't like a big hard line, but just a thin gold bead all the way around the outside edge. Just gives a little bit of flash. Easy peasy, right? Okay, so now I'm going to let this gold paint dry and we can move on to the next step, which is to trace, transfer, and base coat the design elements that are going on this piece. And in this case, it's going to be that bumblebee and the daisy. Now, I have mine already base coated, and it was very simple, it's very straightforward. The stems and leaves are base coated with matcha green, which is a brand new Decor color. I really like this green, it's very pretty. The center is Sunny Day, which is this lovely sunny yellow. The bee is just done with lamp black or carbon black, either or, and the petals are all done with warm white. Just a simple base coat, usually 1 to 2 coats is sufficient. So that's where we come to beginning to add the accents to this. I'm going to start with the center of the flower. And the color I'm using is Warm Sunset. This is also a new color in the Decor lineup. And I'm going to load my brush just a small amount on the tip and load it for floating. And I'm going to apply that color towards the center of this daisy in here And I'm going to shade along this edge of the center of the flower with the warm sunset. And you'll notice the colors are not fully opaque. That's okay. So just a simple little float. Don't spend too much time fussing with it. If it's a little irregular, that's all right too. It just gives it more texture in the center. So for the petals of the flower, I'm using Bahama Blue. This is one of my favorite blues, is the Bahama Blue. And I particularly like it for painting white flowers. It's very pretty on the white. So the load is the same, just tip load it as if you're going to float, because that's what you're going to do. And we're going to add a little blush of that blue. I think we need a bit more. And I get that blue down towards the center of the flower, but on the petals. And then let the color run out as it comes up the flower, or up the petal. We're not looking for absolutely perfect floats. We just want to get that color laid in and then have it fade out as you work towards the end of the petal. This also helps separate some of those petals where they overlap. Just like that. Don't putz too much, just relax and play with it. Let the color go where it goes. It's fine. Just like that. And you can separate those petals. Just keep the white out towards the tip of the petal. I'm running out of water on my brush here. There we go. These daisies work up very quickly. Now, I take that same color and I'm going to go up to the tips of the bee's wings, where the flowers overlap with the bee, like so, and close in tight to the body. Just at the thorax here, put a little float of that same Bahama Blue. And keep the brightest white out towards the tips. And we'll do the same to this little guy here. Now, if at any time you feel that you've overdone it with the blue, there's a very simple solution. Just pick up a little of the warm white and come back in and just float right over that blue. It'll subdue it and tone it down. Just like that. I want to put just a touch more of this blue at the tip of this wing here. Just like that. As you can see, you don't have to putz with this too much. So remember that gorgeous sunset, warm sunset color. I'm going to pick up and get a fairly strong float. I'm going to put a little shadow on the yellow of the bee's thorax, just like that. Now it needs to go on both sides, just narrower on one side than on the other. You want to keep a section of that yellow nice and bright. Okay, so now let's move on to those leaves. Now I've base coated the leaves with that matcha green, but we need to shade them a little bit, and I'm using plantation pine for that. And again, it's going to be a weak float. And it's very simple. We're not looking for a really elaborate paint job on these. We just want to add a little depth. So I'm putting a float of the plantation pine at the base of the leaf where it joins the stem. Just like so. And then you need to put a little shadow underneath that flower to give it a little depth. Do the same at the bottom. And then with the tip of the brush, add a little shadow down the back side of that stem. It's not strong and it's not super obvious, but it still needs to be there. So now we've got our wings done, we've got the daisy done, we've got the leaves filled in, and we've done a little bit of work on the thorax of the bee, but we need to lift all of this off the surface, and we're going to do that with a float of asphaltum. And it is going to be a fairly weak float, but enough to separate the flower from the background. And it's, again, we are not looking for perfection. I just want to lift it a little. So I'm going to pull that float. Pay more attention to the areas closest to the flower and let the float run out. So that includes getting that darker value in here, these little openings. No need to putz with it. Don't fuss with it. Just get a little color in there. And it just helps lift that flower off the background. Neatness doesn't really count with this. So tuck some more in here. If you've got lots of water in your brush, you'll be able to move color around. So I apply the color with that very tip, and then I'll use the heel of the brush to soften the blend. And then you do the same thing around that bumblebee. This part's a little more forgiving than all those little details. I'll pick up a little more water. And we're almost there. I'm going to come back around to the underside of this bee. Get that float in there. There we go. Now, let's do a little bit of work on our bee here and bring him up to snuff. So I'm going to pick up a tiny amount of warm white on a small angular shader. And I'm going to add some highlights to the body of this bee, just to give him a little shape. And you put tiny little highlights on his legs and the eyes. The highlights don't have to be much. Just little brightness, just to give them a dimension. And that same warm white, I'm going to just stand my brush on the chisel edge, and I'm going to add, oops, I didn't quite have enough paint in the brush. I'm going to add a little chisel blend to my bee just to make him look a little fuzzy wherever that black is. And essentially it's just tapping on the chisel edge. And we'll give our bumblebee a little shadow with a little asphaltum. Now I thin that out so it's not too strong, and the shadow goes right over that warm sunset. Remember that orange that we put in? Just like that. Now I'm going to deepen that shadow under the flower and on the wing with a float of asphaltum right over the blue. And do the same at the tips. You can do the same thing to these flowers. Wherever that Bahama blue is, you can put a very weak float of asphaltum over top of it. It just subdues it, keeps it from getting too bold and too bright, but not enough to kill the color altogether. And now it's time to start adding some finishing touches to this daisy. We'll put the asphaltum over that warm sunset and deepen the shadow in the center of the flower. So, time to grab a liner. We're going to start doing a few little detail things. This is that matcha green. It's a very pretty green, and I'm going to add a little white to it just to make it a little more opaque and just a slightly lighter value. And this is for my stems on my leaves. Just like that. Easy peasy. Now, if you have a stylus, by all means use it. I'm not particularly fond of stylus. I prefer to use my brush. But we're going to add some highlighted dots to this flower on the highlight side. Just little dip dots, like so. It creates a little visual texture and a highlight at the same time. Make sure you take it out past the edge of the center so that it overlaps the leaves. It softens the look quite nicely. And then I'm going to do that again, but with asphaltum. And this is where the darker values come in. Keep the dots fairly small. And have it intermix with the center of the daisy. And again, they have to come out over the petals as well. Toss a few in here and there. Keeps things interesting. So we only have a couple more things to do, and they're very simple. That's where my favorite gel pen comes in. I love using this pen on this type of work because you can add some fine little details to those petals. You know, those little lines that come off the center onto the petal. And I like the sketchy little lines around my flowers. It just softens the look of them and keeps them looking very relaxed and easy. So those little details will fit in there really nicely, and it pulls this all together quite well. Now, these gel pens, you can varnish over them, but you have to make sure that they're completely dry. I generally don't varnish until after 24 hours, and then I'll give it a couple of light coats with Deckwort matte spray, or I'll use the Deckwort matte varnish. I like the ultra matte varnish. As long as this ink is well dried, give it a good 24 hours. You're not going to have any trouble with smudging or smearing. But if you're in a bit of a hurry, make sure they're dry, give them 10-15 minutes, and then a light coat of matte spray to set it, and then it'll be fine. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing around our bumblebee here. Just a nice light sketchy line around the wings and around the body. I like how this looks. I like that it gives him this sort of soft and fluffy look. You can add a few little sketchy lines wherever you choose. And I'm going to do the same thing down this stem. I'm not going to do it as a hard line, just a light sketchy line. And I'm going to do the same around the leaves. Keep it light. Now we have one more step. Inside the packet, the kit, you're going to get one of these, which is a printable. There's a variety of bee things and bee designs and tags and bookmarks and whatnot on there. But I've also included these little words: be thankful, be kind, be you. And I chose the one I wanted to use, and that one is be happy. So I'm going to take my favorite pair of edging scissors, and I'm going to cut out my little be happy very neatly, like so. Now we're going to work with a little bit of matte medium. See, I think that looks rather cute. I've got some matte medium here somewhere. There we go. I have some matte medium. I'm going to show you a little trick. Whenever you're working with a matte medium or a decoupage medium, if you have trouble with the paper buckling, this is a really great little tip for that. Just so that it lays nice and flat and it doesn't get all wrinkled and crinkled. Take your paper and get it wet. Dip it into some fresh, clean water. So it should be good and wet. And then take your brush and put a thin layer of matte medium in the area that you want to lay the print. And then while the paper is still wet, lay it in place. And then you can use the brush to seat it. When it's small little pieces like this, this is the best way to do this. Then you don't get ripples and buckles. Paper has a tendency to stretch when it gets wet. So better to have it stretch under control. And then when it dries to the surface nice and tight. So you get a nice firm seat. So now we've got our little be happy in there. I'm going to spatter this just lightly. I'm going to break out my favorite fugly brush. It's not so fugly anymore. Veronica sent me a new one. So I've got a gorgeous brush. I'm going to get it wet. And I'm going to start with a little bit of asphaltum. I like this color for antiquing. It's not as harsh as black. And I'm just going to spatter my surface. I like spatter, so I'm going to be fairly generous with it, but I do like it rather fine. So just rinse out my brush. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of white. And I'm going to spatter a little bit with that. Just a little, not a ton. And there we go. We have our cute little phone stand all ready to go. So don't forget to check the website for the kit. If you don't want the kit, the pattern is also available as an e-packet. Makes a great little gift, fabulous for those little craft shows and bazaars, or even for gifts for family and friends. These little phone stands work really great. Okay guys, that's it for today. Don't forget, hit the subscribe button and get entered for that great prize pack for the class on August 15th. And thanks so much for joining me today. Mwah. Love you. Stay safe.